Hey, this is Boaz. Thanks for showing up. Please visit the Fools and Sages podcast at foolsandsagespodcast.com. There are no spaces and it's all spelled out. You can find show notes, references, bios, merch, and other cool features. Contact us if you have feedback or a question, if you want to appear on the show, or if you want either or both of us to be a guest on your podcast. You can listen and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Podcasts, and anywhere else great podcasts are found. And follow us on X and Instagram. Support us on Patreon. The Patreon link's also in our website. And thank you. Enjoy the show. Good afternoon, Brian.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm well, thank you. We had some snow in Philadelphia, and the city is still standing after the Super Bowl win, which was not a given. Philadelphians take sports very seriously, if you can call destroying the city serious. So,
Well, any excuse for a party.
yeah, it's like a uniquely Philadelphia thing to like
I
destroy
guess
the
it is. I
city
have
when you
heard about
win.
it all my life.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
what
Yep.
was going up and down the street here that night was friendly enough. So,
Oh, that's good.
yeah.
Yeah, that's good. No, there's a whole conversation there about testosterone and males of certain age groups and the history of war and the psychology behind it, but I don't think that's necessarily today's topic, so we won't
Not today's topic, but
open
maybe I'll
that
make
can
a
of
note.
worms. But there's a whole thing there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and what does sports represent? Yeah.
Right.
No, what I thought we'd do today is in our last episode, I don't know if this will end up getting edited out, but you said something to the effect of in order for meaning to exist, it needs language.
Mhm.
And I love um, the kind of linearness of that, but I don't understand it. I don't
Okay.
understand why meaning can't exist without language. And I thought maybe that's a jumping off point for us. And curious to hear more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, and one of the things that you had mentioned in our last episode, which got me thinking, was about what are the things that might help someone's hermeneutical process be uh, pure, to have it not a gang aft, as I said, what is it, gang aft, gangly? Is that what it was? To go awry. It's one of those Scottish things I'm trying to remember.
Oh, okay. A Finnegan's Wake
Uh,
reference.
uh, Actually, John Dewey, but
Okay.
Scottish. So yeah.
Oh,
But
right.
anyway, uh, so um, and that was what are the things that set us up to have our hermeneutical machine process, uh, which is to say, if touching back to our previous episodes, we spoke about the semantic world and this idea that we build a cognitive model of the world that we can manipulate that's like a map and that it brings out certain features and drops out certain features, et cetera, et cetera. And so the question then I think that you posed was, what do we do like to empower our hermeneutical function to enhance it? And with the idea that, again, hermeneutics being the art of not misunderstanding, so we were focusing on, and this is, yeah, I'm going to work from there back to the conversation about language, right? Because we we started out with the understanding that pure hermeneutics was just about interpreting a text. And we had that beautiful hermeneutical circle where I assume what the book is about. I read the first sentence or I read page one, and that's now informed my impression of what the whole book is about. It's ruled out some of the possibilities I thought maybe were there, and it's hardened into fact some things that I maybe had as suspicions about it. But then I go and I read page two and I read page three, and this circle begins between my image of the whole, my understanding of the meaning of the whole, as it's informed by the next sentence, the next page, the next chapter. Those my understanding of the next chapter then also as part of that circle is informed by my growing, morphing picture of the whole. So we engage with a text in this hermeneutical circle of eating the pieces and bringing coherence to it through putting those pieces in their place within our picture of the whole, which becomes less and less fanciful and more filled in true detail as our experience goes on. So now we go into philosophical hermeneutics, or this idea that, okay, now my life is the book. The question is, what meaning does life have? If it's 42, then why? Right. For those hoopy fruits out there. Uh, and we talked about before, is that question about life, is it a hermeneutical question or is it an analytical question? And the difference, just reprising these things, right? The the hermeneutical side of things, meaning that it's enriched by my subjectivity, that the things that I bring to it, I think we mentioned in a way of that I have within me from accumulated experience, from my updated, that is the model of the whole that I have as I take this new piece in, which might be today when I get up in the morning. Here comes the new piece. Somehow that new piece is going to change my impression of the whole. And the way I'm going to receive that new piece is going to be conditioned by the whole. And we've spoken about that, 6 ways from Sundays, how that goes about. But that meaning always happens within language. Meaning, saying that all meaning is based on and depends on language doesn't mean that there are no qualia, that we don't have. And by qualia is that idea of the actual taste, the experience of the taste of the ripe peach as you bite into it, or the sensation of the wind on the shore, all those things, the non-repeating, non-ending decimal places of those experiences, if you will. All those qualia, they have meaning, but they can't. We need to language them to work within to relate those meanings to ourselves and to each other and to the larger context, because all meaning is context based, right? Which is
Let-
why we do this reference to the whole, the part, the whole, the part, the whole. That's the context nesting the meaning of the piece, if you will.
if we could pause there for a minute, because I think that's a bold thesis. So take martial arts, for example. The learning that our body does through practicing forms and sparring and exposure to different techniques and all of that stuff. Could not that learning occur without language? It seems like it could just occur somatically.
Um, Theoretically, I'm not sure that that subjectively we could organize it without relying inherently on a languaging. That the working components of mind is
Okay.
syntax
Okay.
and semiotics.
So
Semiotics
you're
being
saying that
symbology of things.
in order for it to be meaning, it has to be organized. It can't just be experience, even if that experience is cumulative or additive or developmental in some way.
Yeah, I mean, because we represent it to ourselves. And so the function of the cognitive model is a metaphorical one, right? Our cognitive model is a metaphor for the real world, which is an argument for the fundamental linguisticality of reality. This is
Okay.
where this is the mystical connection to the world of forms, to the world of meaning. And this is why in arche, in the beginning, first came logos, that pattern of symbology and syntax. We have the experiences that then get symbolically represented, but we need a syntax to move them, to relate them, to hold them and carry them, to work mentally on them, to build a cognitive model of the world out of them. That's why we can call that world a semantic world, is because that meaning is fundamentally linguistic, and reality has a linguisticality to it that is mysterious.
Okay. So so maybe let me feed that back to you in probably with a lot less flavor, just to see if so so if we experienced objective reality purely, there was no semantic reality, we wouldn't be creating a cognitive model. We wouldn't be creating a cognitive model that's a metaphor for objective reality or a reflection of objective reality or a stand-in for objective reality.
I think if we inhibited, now maybe this seems like a leap, but I think if we inhabited rather this chimerical objective reality, we might find that free will disappeared with it, and that our perception, our semantic model is rooted in our intentionality for consciousness to reach out and grasp something, to say what is that, or to just put out the premise of a that that's separate and pulled out from the kaleidoscope of all the sounds and colors.
It makes me think that
Consciousness itself had to manifest intentionality to reach out to build that experience of consciousness. And
maybe
in
let's
that
stick with definitions still. Sorry,
uh-huh.
what you just said was interesting, but I'm wanting to like build some foundation first. So you mentioned that free will might not exist without this cognitive model. And that makes me think that there's an association between free will and meaning, and that purely perceiving objective reality, even if we develop, so I'm making some assumptions there, but even if we develop as a result of pure experience of objective reality, I don't know if that's possible, to your point.
Mhm.
Um, that doesn't include free will. It's not necessarily meaningful because meaning has to do with kind of the framework of the cognitive model we use to represent objective reality, which is inherently subjective.
Exactly.
That makes me that makes me rethink what I thought meaning was, and makes me realize that I didn't have a great definition for it. And I'm
Well, and I
wondering if
want you to rethink also subjectivity, because we're given this idea of subjectivity as something that's very passive,
Mhm.
right? Like, and it's just all what's happening to me. But consciousness, that witness deep inside, has to reach out first. And that's where intentionality and free will is. And the first step of building that cognitive model of the world is rooted in free will. Now
Okay.
that's the argument. You're gonna maybe this is something that has to be experienced. Maybe meditation that makes this clearer, or hallucinogens or something. I don't know. But that, I think that's a pretty clear argument there, that consciousness involves intentionality, and maybe this is the microcosmic version of when the creator says, let there be light, let there be mankind, let there be, that famous fiat lux, right? Maybe this is our model of the intention of the creator of the all conscious in the manifestation of the universe, maybe we are recapitulating that. Now I'm just kind of shooting here, right, into the breeze. But I feel like something like that goes on because there is an assertion of that witnessing self in reaching out to grasp the world, to dissect it, to be able to operate on it. There's some will
So
there.
so my question was, do you have a working definition of meaning? And I think what you're saying implies it, but I wonder if you have a succinct like, oh yeah, here's what meaning is.
I mean, we can look at the landscape meaning lives in, I think. I mean, I think that we know that meaning is a distillate of experience. That meaning rely has certain things that it relies on, and that is it relies on this witnessing self as a receiver of meaning. And I would say that it's meaning is the result of this hermeneutical process because all meaning is context based. So that means for me to get this nugget of meaning, I have to understand the context. Well, the context is the coast of Norway, which is to say, the context is a non repeating, non ending, non algorithmic decimal. So that uh, uh, we're never going to grasp it all, but we have to make representations of it, and that's that distillation, whether it's of an object or a relationship of objects, to build that model. That's the realm that meaning has to live in the dimension of mind and the dimension of language.
So the creation of the metaphor itself that the cognitive model represents is a transmutation of objective reality into meaning.
Yeah, I mean, the cognitive model is the big mental blackboard that pieces of information get stuck on and contextualized by, and therefore take on their meaning from. It's almost like this idea that if you have a point, just a single point in space, you don't know if it's moving or not. And then if you have 2 points in space and they're getting closer or further, you still don't know which one's moving. And then only when you start to get 3, 4, 5, when the context builds, can you start to understand what's going on with that one little piece. So this is that sort of a thing. It's a bootstrap problem. And so we solve it by that circling back, building a coherence. And the argument is that our self has to have that coherence fundamentally as a presupposition. This might be part of Plato's remembering, that we have to have an intuition of the book before we pick it up and read it. And so that impression is constantly getting filled in because we started with something.
That reminds me of your model of some events occur with a magnitude that causes them to cast their shadow backwards in time. So we experience the shadow of the event before it occurs. Like it sounds like that's necessary in Plato's remembering in some way.
Yeah, well, a timelessness in that dimension of mind. Yeah. And which would be, in the mind of God, I suppose you'd say, if you want to take another dramatic leap. If you want to say, well, because we get into a certain philosophical boxes here. If consciousness is not reducible to material things, then where the hell does it come from? And the answer would have to be something like more consciousness, bigger consciousness. And then we look at some experiences that people have, and that tends to reinforce that. And that's where we get into this subjectivity, intersubjectivity, objectivity. This is where we get into the midst of those in between zones where only wizards and magicians and saints and unicorns inhabit, right? Um, and through the power of language. because language is that connecting thing between the thing that we call it and this timeless world of mind that allows us to run our syntax and our semiotics on it, right? Semiotics is the idea of things being symbols of things. And so that's that basic metaphorical relationship that seems to be fundamental to consciousness. This is like this.
So maybe let's talk about the collective unconscious for a minute. So each of us is creating this cognitive model. In the process, we have to be in relationship with meaning because everything we put on our own individual blackboard by definition has meaning and gains context from the other things that are on that blackboard and have meaning. So when you take a model like Carl Jung's archetypes, whose blackboard are they on? Or
Right.
how do they get on a blackboard to,
Right.
like, how do these blackboards interrelate, maybe is another way of asking.
Right. I think that there's different models of that, and I think that there's a few fruitful ways to think about it. The I build a cognitive model, and we've referred to the effects of that cognitive model as my foot nailed down in a particular room on a particular in a house, and well, other people probably lived in that house. And so the impact of that location on my building cognitive model, because remember, we don't get to start the book of life at page one. We don't even know how many chapters it goes back. So we're picking up things on the run. This is like jumping into a television series in season 6. You don't know who any of these people are, right? And that's the experience of birth. This thrownness into the milieu of life. So so right away, this cognitive model starts to assemble, and because of our relationship with other people and because of shared meaning, which is another mysterious thing if we really drill down into it. But through the shared meaning idea, now our cognitive models have major overlaps. Like, yes, mom's and dad's world is very different than the child's world. What's important to them are completely different and maybe mutually inconceivable uh, to each other. But the fact that it's cold outside in the wintertime and the fact that we're eating this kind of food and the fact that all of this stuff starts to pin down a contextual world that starts it doesn't we don't just inhabit it. It doesn't just bump into us like dead billiard balls. It actually impacts our world of meaning, right? By building models of relationship, by, you get into psychological theory and we have this idea of anima and animus. And well, we start to get cultural values that start to download meaning on us. And then our personal model starts to be impacted by our experience trying to update that cognitive model. And so we don't always take away from it what the intentional implant was for it, maybe. Maybe grandma said something to us with one intention, but our life experience translates it in a different way, right? Or maybe my culture tells me something and my life experience is such that I translate it in a different way. So but we swim in a collective world of meaning that's based on our language. And to a and I think that language is a good model for that. All English speakers share certain elements of their cognitive models because of sharing the hardware of building it. But a New Zealander and an Australian and a Brit and an American, or an American from Louisiana, an American from Maine, and an America from Texas, and America, you're going to get overlaps, but you're going to get big differences. Uh, just go to these different places and try to order a sandwich. The
You mean a
linguistic,
hoagie?
uh, I meant a grinder.
Um,
We're talking about
so
submarines here, folks. You see how the models then change, and because, like, when I was a kid, I moved around a bunch, and it turned out that what was soda in one place was, pop in another place, and sneakers were tennis shoes, and, so even there were little differences in the handles of this cognitive model, but, uh,
I guess I've seen those kinds of differences as incidental to meaning as opposed to formative. Um,
they're contextualizing, that's all.
yeah, yeah. So let's take another I think slight detour, but I think it might be illuminating. Which is we've talked about the idea of right mind in Buddhist practice,
Right view?
right view, sorry, where it seems like, to use the language we're using in this episode, the symbols and metaphors get stripped out of the cognitive model so that the view is as close to objective reality as possible. And I propose, and not knowing what I'm talking about, I propose that with the removal of the symbols and the filters and the metaphors, meaning is not lost. Rather, meaning might be more directly experienced. And I think there's like a universal meaning, perhaps, that's maybe paradoxical. Like, when I was thinking about what my definition of meaning was, my experience of it is purely subjective, and it's something like, and all this matters because it does, right? It's there's no like
Sure, sure.
um
Well,
I,
it's like there's a dial on the dashboard of meaning for scale. And we've talked before about where Lao Tzu says we view life without passion, or if I says we view life, yeah, without passion to see the source of life, to see the Tao, and with passion to see its manifest forms.
and here passion
But the
is
two are not different. We just give them different names. The two are not different. And this is the crux of the thing, right? So, yes, I know that nothing matters because ultimately everything's the Tao, but I still want to taste how sweet that strawberry is and really suck up the red of the fruit and really get the scent on the wind. And because that's not for no reason. You are the eyes of the world, right? So, and that's why the Zen master says things like, well, what's Zen? Oh, it's 3 pounds of flax. What's Zen? It's in the very excrement, right? We referred to that last time. What's Zen? It's eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, pass water when you have to. So that it's not this idea of transcension in the world of unicorns is a misconstrual, right? That that that's why this idea. And I wonder where this comes from. That enlightenment is inches from here.
yeah. I get why you're going there,
Uh-huh.
and maybe that answers my question, but maybe I need you to connect the dots a little more.
Okay.
My question is, so if we see the world without passion to understand its source, and with passion in order to understand whatever, our experience of it, I'm equating passion with cognitive model. And the proposition earlier, and I know this philosophy is not logic, so I'm not trying to like plant a stake here. Um, but the proposition earlier is that meaning results from our need to create a cognitive model in order to experience the world, and especially perhaps with our initiation of that experience or application of free will. If we have right view, or let's say, if we view the world without passion so we can understand its source, how do we experience its source with meaning? Because understand that as we have removed the cognitive model, we have transcended it.
Hmm. I don't know that I don't believe that the idea is that you go and you live in that place all the time, 24/7.
But it's
I
meaningful to experience that place or to ex
absolutely, because it contextualizes everything else.
and so
Because
it's only because you had a cognitive model that you experience that as meaningful.
right,
Even
right.
if you have since transcended the cognitive model, it's now meaningful to have transcended it. The cognitive
And
model is still the initiator of meaning.
I think we have to leave from somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
And I think that that's why Zen has this fabulous idea of the Zen bones. And they say that when the birds of prey come, there's no meat on the Zen bones. They
Yeah.
find nothing but Zen bones.
There's no cognitive model.
There's no
There's no
payout
attachment.
in the
Yeah.
cognitive world because it does relativize everything.
Yeah.
And you can't have everything relativized and still have value the same way because you've just relativized it all, if that makes sense. So you be a big you, and then you're the universe, aham brahmasmi, right? I am that. I am, or you're the small y, you, and you experience the Tao from the side of the 10,000 things. Both places are natural dwelling spots, and that they mutually interdepend, right? And that's what my argument would be, and I this is where we dovetail up with ethics.
That's exactly where I was gonna go, because in the
Okay.
last session, we talked about language, hermeneutics, and ethics all being interrelated, and so I think maybe we've covered the language piece enough for now. How do we
Yeah,
bring ethics into it?
yeah. Although when we talk with Claudia, we probably should try to squeeze more language
For sure. I just
insights
mean, like, I'm
because that
grokking it enough
yeah,
to
yeah.
attach another piece now. That's
Right, and what that tells us is it tells us why philosophers are traditionally always trained in languages, because interpretation is so close to discovering wisdom. What's the real meaning at work here? And so that gets us, like, to the second question that I was thinking about what you brought up last time, which is what is the condition that empowers my hermeneutic process, my philosophical hermeneutic process, so that my model is updated. So I'm getting the best conclusions that aren't, and it's we could say that it's not the Zen idea is necessarily that I lose all distinctions and all discriminations. It's just that I don't want to have the personal ones that deflect me from the big picture ones, and uh, so that it doesn't inhibit my realizations. Um,
or I'm completely in the moment and really none of that stuff
right,
needs to play.
right,
Yeah.
right. So yeah, I mean, there's a type of transcension there. Um, but so the question then becomes, well, what does optimize that? And for some traditions, it was, well, you go to a monastery, you know, and I tried that, and it was definitely a thing that uh, that contributed to the upgrading of my cognitive models of things. But if we think about it in that hermeneutical sense, that I'm building a working model picture of the whole and its meaning, and that I'm updating that with every meditation session, with every breath that I take, with every new day, I'm updating that model. I started to think since our last conversation, well, what are the things that seem to me that are is implied by that? And I realized that this might be, I don't know that I've ever introduced this concept before, but I realized that in making decisions in my life regarding meaning, I felt that it was, and not always consciously, but I felt that it was necessary for me to live a life that was live a human life that was relevant and broad based enough that it gave me a broad exposure to human experience so that my picture stood on as many legs, my model stood on as many legs. I didn't want I didn't want to look away from things that weren't pretty, maybe, because I wanted to get the understanding, that updating of my picture of things, if you will, that represented. So
With discernment, right? It's not just the number of legs, but there's some qualitative.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. And whenever I rule something out, if I want to discriminate something out, like, okay, I'm not going to become a heroin addict just to know what it's like. That what or a murderer just to know what it's like. That wasn't on my karmic plate apparently this lifetime. But I don't want to say, well, I'm not going to hang around with poor people because I don't want to their stink upon me, right? I thought that it was actually good for me to experience life as a not rich person. On the order of Thoreau's saying is to be born rich is to be stillborn. What does he mean by that? He means you're going to get an impoverished cognitive model. Your picture of life is going to be skewed in a certain way, and that's going to affect the the validity of your philosophical conclusions. That's going to tweak out what wisdom you might try to develop.
Not just what wisdom, but the implication there, going to the first half of our conversation today, is that there's a difference in the quality of meaning associated with different cognitive models. Like they all have meaning,
Mhm.
but they also can be qualitatively different. So maybe that's something. Maybe that's what's leading into ethics
Well, and within
or
the
morality, I guess.
yeah, and this is again something that I think was the phenomenologists had some interesting insights about, that we mentioned as this idea of sharing horizons. Um, but this idea of that language can build an experiential bridge that we can share meaning through. Uh, like one of the feedbacks that we got, I had made some comments about Zoom and me feeling that it cut down some dimensions. And someone responded saying, "Yeah, but enough of the dimensions are coming through that I'm getting a lot out of it that I couldn't travel for." I was like, "Phew, absolutely correct." And I mean, we're experiencing that ourselves right now, right? So, uh, but there is this implicit, like in the old world, why did we value elders? Well, because the ones that survived, at least, we presume that there's something about their cognitive model that they've accumulated through their world of meaning that it's got more dimension in time. So they've been able to grok longer patterns that we might not have a statistically graspable, significant sample of to be able to see the full pattern. If it's an 80-year pattern, 20-year-old's not going to see that, right? So without some serious studying of history, say. So but the idea is that there might be a breadth to their cognitive world as well, to their semantic world that they can download for us, and that by sharing their meaning, we've distilled their experience and don't need to relive it. That's why we don't want, this is this bridge building is, when we put it into its philosophical significance, right? If we remember, okay, I'm a non-repeating, non-ending decimal, and the other is which we've used that idea before of the other as a sort of a generic, but the other experiencing consciousness is another non-repeating. So we have two kind non-repeating, non-ending decimal. So we have two kind of not graspable entities, right? And they both bring, to borrow from physics, a sort of a probabilistic, a potency through those cognitive semantic world models that they bring. And so regardless of experience, regardless of how they're built, their difference is merely enough, I think. Uh, and so through different methodologies, and I think I don't want to make this sound easier than it is, but there is a method of building that bridge. I think we're still learning that. Uh, I think that's part of what Plato and Socrates and everything that we're getting into about discourse and the way that we regard others and the way we use language to build a bridge. You know, I guess that would be the other thing that I would say. Don't just build yourself an hermeneutically relevant life by experiencing breadth of the human experience, but ground yourself in language. Expand your grasp of language because language does serve this fundamental role of making the bridge. And so understanding the breadth of expression, understanding different languages, understanding the urge to linguisticality. Thank you, Gadamer, right? That there's something, like the way you spoke it before was as if it just happened that we had a need to put things into language. And that kind of is the languaging of we just happened to happen here and it was all just by an accident. And that's not it. Our linguisticality is hand in glove with the reality that we manifested in. We're not who we are for no reason. That's that reductionist materialist crapola, right? To use the technical term, the MRC. We could make that a thing, an acronym.
I guess I haven't integrated the materialist reductionist thing with the great mystery. I just kind of have experienced the mystery and accept it, but I don't have I don't have that tower built. So it's interesting because I think I'm not convinced. I'm convinced that language is necessary for meaning to be experienced by humans. I don't know if that answers the question, does meaning exist in the universe independently of humans, and or what is the meaning that humans ultimately are experiencing and translating through these cognitive models? We don't have to
And
answer that
remember that
now, but
you could be switching out, though, consciousness or mind
for
or
meaning.
life for the
Yeah.
word meaning.
Yeah. I don't know about life, because that is back in the materialist reductionist world potentially. But I don't think we have to answer that now.
I
I'm just
think that will
responding
be
to the
I think that
there
life
is
will be
some ambivalence about, like, I'm not confused about meaning and mystery, at least in my own experience, but but I don't necessarily have it all on the blackboard and how the pieces all connect.
right, right. Well, the way that we tend to say it is we tend to think that
They're in
that
different quadrants for me,
that
right?
that, that
It's like the
meaning is based on the world as if we distill it out.
mhm.
That's the initial impression. But what we're learning is that it's the opposite. It's that we had to have the capacity for meaning. The universe had to put that in us for us to go out and find it. And so that actually mind and consciousness and meaning precede the expression of these things in matter. That's the
Yeah.
mystery. That's the
I
great mystery.
I hear you and others, Fajin and
Finnegan.
others, saying that, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
Uh-huh.
Um, so, but let's go back
It
to
it would be
ethics,
interesting as a
right?
side note to have a conversation with one of the rabbis about their picture of this.
Yeah,
Exactly this question, yeah, and that because like I can't this is not an analytical thing, this is a hermeneutical thing, and for it to make sense, it's got to resonate with your all the model that you've built. You and I, for example, have had some non-ordinary experiences. Well, now you've that's wrecked your model for running the software that used to work on that old model, right?
Definitely wrecked the analytical model,
You
yes.
have you had to add something. You had to redraw some
Well,
territory.
I think what I'm noticing is that I've just kind of drawn a dotted line, and said,
Uh-huh.
the certain things, um, the explanation of certain things through an analytical lens is satisfactory, and the explanation of other things through that lens is not, and
No.
between them lies a great mystery. That's
Right.
that's how far I've gotten.
And also there lies the danger of MRC, materialist reductionist crapola.
That even containing it is inadequate, because you end up needing to integrate the stuff that you were explaining satisfactorily with a materialistic or analytical worldview. You end
Right.
up needing to ascribe the appropriate meaning to that in order for the dotted line to be permeated. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um,
And just as a side note, for folks that have followed us this far,
oh God, what have we
there's
done?
yeah. Well, what I was gonna recommend is you might find the book by, David Bentley Hart, the book, that he just wrote. The title is a quote from Thales or Thales, the first Greek philosopher. "All things are full of gods." And he discusses all the different philosophical models about where does consciousness, how does consciousness, what is that process. So some of the things that I've talked about come from some of those schools. Is consciousness an epiphenomenon? Is consciousness emergent? Is it the product of a panpsychism of some kind, or is it fundamental? And what are all the arguments around that? So that just to give him a stick for that, because I thought that it was kind of relevant in that it speaks to that fundamental paradigm, because we're gonna do things different if we really understand this stuff differently.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't think we've bolted ethics onto this language plus hermeneutics machine that we're building.
Right. Um,
Why? Why is ethics such a important piece? Like, I guess on the surface, I think ethics or morals or any number of things um, might be candidates to round out, systematically what we're talking about. But
yeah.
but in the last couple of episodes, you've really emphasized ethics as and how we relate to the other. So I wonder if we can. We're not going to bring it home, but at least we can outline it a little.
Yeah, I don't wanna I think that this is likely what, Levinas is gonna really explain, and I'm
Oh,
hoping that
okay. And
Dr. Howard can really but to kinda give it an overview, it's like, okay, if I am this infinity, we'll just say as a shorthand for this idea that I'm like a non-repeating, non-ending decimal that can't be. There's no algorithm to predict it. So you either calculate it all the way or you don't get the next digit, right? So I think as far back as Descartes, he sort of referred to that as an infinity, right? And so the other, in some important sense, I've said this before, the other person is, the other human is like pie, and I didn't mean that as the dessert, although at times that's appropriate, but
occasionally that's true, but
occasionally that's
mostly
true, but
not.
mostly not. But that number that the Greeks associate with pi is kind of interesting because it does have that quality of infinity that's just sewn right in there, not going to get it out. It's just in there, and it's such a fundamental relationship within a circle.
It's not
And
sewed
a
in there. It's
circle is such
baked
a
in there.
pardon.
It's baked in there. It's not
It's
sewed in
baked into the pie. You're right. Exactly. Regardless of the filling. And so, which is kind of an interesting thing because a circle is pretty fundamental, right? And this idea we might have touched on between, one of the things about the Freemasons and the symbol is that it has a square and a compass. So it's talking about the square and the circle. And historically, this idea has been associated with the circle as like the divine world, the non-manifest aspect of things, that it's never ending and never beginning, and it's everywhere the same. And then the square has always been associated with the material world of four elements, and hence the four sides of the square and all that. So, so then calculus comes in with how do we square the loon, a loon being a part of a circle. How do we translate from this world of the irrational, the uncapturable? You can only approximate it based on how much time you have to calculate more digits, but you're never going to catch this fish. So so other humans, and that the fact that my witnessing eye is this mystery. Where does this consciousness come from? All we know is that if we come to the conclusion that it's irreducible to matter, then it has to come from more consciousness. And that's a fundamental mystery. And one of the ways is you can try to look back up the microscope, and that's the path of introspection and meditation, and to try to understand the way consciousness unfolds. Some of the other ways, through shamanism and ways to experience non ordinary reality, gives you some idea of the territory, but there's a fundamental mystery there. So if I am that fundamental mystery and you are that fundamental mystery, and the thing that we share is meaning through language, there's an encounter of two the way that Fagin said it was, whenever you have an encounter between two quantum realities, something new is generated. And the idea of quantum is that idea of having free will involved. The fact that my next word is probabilistic until I say it. Because, yeah, there's the context of what the sentence was and the words before it. And yeah, there's the things that Brian tends to say. And, even so much as I've had, Annie has said that when she's heard a question, said, "Oh, I knew exactly what you were going to say when you answered that question." So, but it's only a probabilistic thing because I might say hoopy frood. I didn't even know I was going to say that, right? So there's a probabilistic thing that collapses when the moment happens and I choose what I'm going to say. And the same with you. And so we have this kind of interchange where meaning encounters meaning, and we don't know exactly. It's like breeding dogs. You don't know whether the tail's going to be curly or fluffy, or whether it's going to bark or howl, or you just don't know. And that's the mystery of dialectic, I think, that Plato was onto also, that said that we could dredge things out of this mysterious world of meaning through the encounter of these two probabilistic, quantum realities that are two witnessing humans. And the Greeks had this idea for that inner self that they called nous. And I'll have to dig out the do some homework on nous, because it's a pretty fundamental thing. It's the thing that knows, that root, that witnessing eye that's deeper, that hasn't changed since you were a child and won't when you're on your last day. It's that same witnessing self that never changes. That's the mysterious thing. That's what we can't explain, and that's this root connection. So if other people are that, and if that's my connection to God, then other people are God. Then how I relate to that, my relationship to that, to other, it's a fundamental avenue for my cognitive model to upgrade, to expand. And when we talk about the evolution of consciousness, the expansion of consciousness, we're actually talking about, as long as it's in consciousness, it's going to be working in this at this level of mind. And we're literally talking about expanding it into making that model more cognitively apt. So I'm getting bigger and bigger hermeneutical muscles, and then I interact with other people, and then we build a field of increasing hermeneutical muscles. And then this is almost like Hegel's historical dialectic where we together come closer and closer to, for him it was reason, rationalism. But uh, I think now we know that the territory is bigger than that. Um, so
It's
so
a
yeah.
really different explanation of the role of ethics than I've tried to digest before. I just kind of think of ethics as starting from the basis of, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it's kind of like, if you want to have a reasonably functioning society, there are certain expectations that we have to have about how we deal with one another on a day-to-day
Mhm,
basis.
mhm,
Um, but you're kind of bringing in, like, whether that's the case or not, and regardless of
mhm,
functioning society,
mhm.
how we deal with one another as a refinement and potentially expander of consciousness, is what's important about it.
I think that that's one of the things that's important about it, yeah. I think that that's maybe the head part that's important about it. I think there's probably a heart part and a belly part that's important about it, that has to do with ethics, that has to do with, and I don't think we've gotten into this, but, the, part of this mystery, and I don't know, it'd be good to have some conversations with the right people about this, but part of the mystery of the connection between this dead matter idea and consciousness is that there is something that some intentionality that can move through some kind of energy such that my consciousness enables me to wiggle my fingers. And in the Chinese models, this idea has been intent, moving qi, moving li or muscles. And but the idea that there is some mysterious connection that has to happen there for spirit to inhabit matter. This is something that, I mean, I guess where we have to look at it from the subjective side because that's the only real window on this. Um, but the idea that just the fundamental idea of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or don't do unto them as you would not have them do unto you, is the other, gets sometimes put out as that way. But what that means is recognize a fundamental sameness in your experience to the experience of the other. And so, if one takes oneself, holds oneself and one's own life to be sacred in a certain sense, then holding someone else as oneself, that's kind of that idea there. Uh, that's going to be the ultimate recognition of what's going on, in other words. So that again, to me, this is a pathway, this is a way to the Buddha path, a way to the recognition of on the highest level I'm capable of what's really going on here, right? Of my hermeneutical conclusions. And so I want to operate out of that my highest, most up-to-date hermeneutical conclusions. And those are not purely, and again, to remind people, the hermeneutics came into existence as a way of not just interpreting scripture, but also of interpreting art and history. And those are both things that are different than interpreting scientific conclusions. They're more like they're more like building meaning out of them. And so we have to have this, we have to come about it in a different way. And so, looking at life that way, we have to get our meaning from life. We're not going to, there's no formula on a calculator that I'm going to be able to punch out. I'm going to have to go about this hermeneutically. And that is, I'm going to have in my own mind, to satisfy my own self, my own story about what's really going on here, which is connected to who am I, which is connected to who are you, which is connected to the big cosmic WTF. And so you want to operate out of the highest model of that you've been able to muster. And that's where the influence of teachers and other people that have mustered a pretty impressive, you know, hermeneutical methodology. It's worth to try to understand that. And again, I keep using that word hermeneutical because it means to interpret, to interpret, to interpret. So I want to move away from the idea that things are just cold facts and you either understand the fact or you don't. No, everything needs interpretation. Interpretation right away brings with it perspective, brings with it understanding the source of the thing. Understand, like a lot comes in with that. And my point about using that all the time is that there's a lot of dimensions to it. And that's what a human is is to bring all those dimensions out to try to reduce everything to this scientific materialism would be appropriate if we were androids or built like calculators or but aside from that we have to realize that only applies in its appropriate realm and to get meaning out of a great painting or a great piece of work or a great poem or a human story of someone else's experience, there's no calculator for that.
And meaning, not just qualia, like the richness of
You'll never
digesting
get the qualia.
a
The
great
qualia
poem.
is incommunicable.
Uh-huh.
But so the meaning is all we have is that representation of the qualia, and we strive for that. That's what poetry is about.
Mhm.
Uses language, but it's totally different than discursive language where I'm really making fine distinctions. Although it makes fine distinctions where, maybe that isn't the way to describe it. Uh, we're using, and this is why Finnegan's Wake was so significant because he really gets all the things, even the biological things, like the way certain things live in our ear. And so we can play with that by putting in other things and pulling associations and doing things way different than just normal word usage, like in a nice textbook that's just trying to explain everything clearly. It's literally playing with all of those hyperlinguistic uh, phenomenon that sit on top of the meaning, like overtones in music, right? And so yeah, that's where this idea of a hermeneutical undertaking to really not misunderstand life in its largest sense. So that would be like metaphysical hermeneutics, maybe.
Okay, so we're gonna have to um, close out here, but maybe one last question. You referenced Douglas Adams earlier. Is 42 just a random number, or do you think he was trying to tell us something?
I think you should know by now nothing's random.
Fair enough.
Not in the mind of God.
And Douglas Adams was
Also
using his
not
own
random.
cognitive model to translate the universal mystery into words we could read and digest.
And all those, Phil K. Dick said some great stuff about that, about the power of language and the way it moves through mind, what it can generate in mind. You think of songs that you love or things that spoke to you at certain times. It definitely transcends the dictionary, and AI will never understand it, right? Because it doesn't have that what did Hawkwind call it? That quark, strangeness, and charm.
Hmm.
You know that song? It's today's rock and roll reference. Albert Einstein was a pretty nice guy, but no one ever called him Al. He didn't have that quark, strangeness, and charm. That quark, strangeness, and charm.
Who's that by?
It's by Hawkwind.
Okay, they're
You know
like in the
Hawkwind?
gentle giant ilk, right? Like prog rock.
No,
No,
Hawkwind. Oh boy, there's nothing like Hawkwind. This
I'll
is
have to
it's
check it
worth
out.
folks. It's worth googling Hawkwind. Okay, Hawkwind played live at Leeds when the Who played there. Famous album by the Who, Live at Leeds. Except they played on the top of a bus in the parking lot, and one of their buddies was Michael Moorcock, the science fiction writer. And so they got some fun albums out there. Warrior on the Edge of Time and Space Ritual, and it's one of the early precursors of psychedelic rock.
Uh-huh.
and one of their buddies who might have even played with them for a while and then split off was the incomparable Lemmy.
Oh, okay.
And the song that Lemmy plays, "Kings of Speed," was actually a Hawkwind song originally,
Huh.
and which can also be but no, some great stuff. Psychedelic Warriors Dissolve into Smoke, and, the Warrior on the Edge of Time, and the Wizard blew his horn, and, clearly some science fiction writers were, you know, Michael Moorcock was helping. He might have even performed with them.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's one of those old things that occupy a niche on its own that unless you know about it, you probably don't know about it. But now with YouTube and the big brain, you can go check it out, Hawkwind. And another free thing you might not have known about that you can also search and listen to is the 13th Floor Elevators coming out of Texas, of all places. So check those guys out for our rock and roll reference for
Cool.
this
Thank you,
episode.
Brian.
Very cool. Talk to you next time, folks.
Yep.